what bothers me is like the plot, the pacing and the plotting makes no sense.
No,
the story makes no sense. Luke is the travesty. It just it's all anyway. The salt planet's cool looking.
The salt planet looks cool, but we don't need to rehash.
We've already done this.
Decade
F
old
it goes.
things.
I will watch any Star Wars prequel before any of those.
Brandon Sanderson is arguably the most successful fantasy author of our era. And when he diagnoses Disney Star Wars as incoherent, he isn't just chasing internet clout and internet outrage, but watching a catastrophic narrative failure. To Brandon Sanderson, The Last Jedi and Disney Star Wars aren't just bad movies, but an epic failure of narrative architecture. Just as a skyscraper will inevitably collapse if it's not built in accordance with gravity, so too will an epic mythos if it violates the inherent laws of narrative weight and character progression. Disney didn't just write a bad story, but they dismantled the scaffolding that preserves a mythos for generations. Today we will examine the Disney Star Wars sequels through the creative genius of Brandon Sanderson, to not only understand what went wrong, but how Disney could have crafted a compelling sequel that would endure for generations. Brandon Sanderson, like many Star Wars fans, was extremely upset with The Last Jedi's treatment of Luke Skywalker. And while many fans are quick to pounce on The Last Jedi and identify Rian Johnson's work as the shatterpoint of the trilogy, it's important to ask several key questions. Where are the Jedi in The Force Awakens? Are there any signs of a Jedi Order? Was Luke accompanied by others, or left alone and scarred by the past? Luke Skywalker's depressing demise wasn't conjured by Rian Johnson, but concocted by J.J. Abrams in The Last Jedi. Upon finishing The Force Awakens, J.J. Abrams didn't know why Luke was alone on that island. He didn't know what Luke had done the past 30 years, or how his story would develop in the following films. Rather than answering these questions, J.J. Abrams merely kicked the can further down the road, expecting the next guy to figure it out. J.J. Abrams didn't build his career making movies. Instead, he broke out on the hit show Lost. On the surface level, film and TV may seem like the same medium, but they have fundamental differences. A TV show makes money by getting an audience to return weekly, whereas Star Wars films built a legacy story, generating large amounts of revenue from video games, toys, and merchandise. Star Wars is meant to be viewed time and time again. J.J. Abrams developed a writing technique referred to as a mystery box.
The thing is that it represents infinite possibility. It represents hope. It represents potential. And what I love about this box, and what I realized I sort of do in whatever it is that I do, is I find myself drawn to infinite possibility and that sense of potential. And I realize that mystery is the catalyst for imagination.
Here his characters were piecing together puzzles in an information plot. Abrams wasn't trying to lead the characters to a specific place of development. He was just trying to cast a line and snag viewers for as long as he could. His company, Bad Robot, perfected this technique by screen testing various possible outcomes and analyzing which one seemed to generate the most interest among viewers. And I can't deny, the first time I saw the image of the exiled Luke, it did send shivers down my spine. What's happening? Why is Luke alone? Where are the other Jedi? The idea is intriguing, but there's ultimately only one answer to the question. Luke Skywalker failed. He either sat lazily at the beach for 3 decades and didn't even try to establish the Jedi Order, or he failed to protect them, making the same mistake as Yoda, and ignoring a brooding evil. Rian Johnson was caught in a checkmate. This is the ultimate risk of discovery writing. The practice of writing at the seat of your pants and just being one page ahead of your audience, only hoping the final destination will miraculously deliver a meaningful payoff. Perhaps discovery writing can yield an amazing result. But is this a gamble worth making on the largest space epic in human history? To Brandon Sanderson and others, this gamble isn't just reckless, but borderline incomprehensible.
I have been on many panels on writing, and I generally find myself one of the few outliners. This has changed over time. I find that there are more outliners now than there used to be, but I still tend to be in the minority. And so I talk about myself as kind of being odd sometimes, as such a strong outliner. I once sat on a panel in Germany, and I kid you not, I said this, and like how I do it, and all the Germans looked at me and they're like, no, that's how it's done. I'm like, no, there's discovery writing. They're like horrified. They're like, people do that without a structure? I thought it was funny. It's a little bit of stereotype, but it literally happened that all the Germans are like, it's insane to not have an outline.
Brandon Sanderson keenly detects a complete detour from the plot.
With a book that people like boring or I got lost, usually the signposts of progress are not there. Now, a big reason the signposts of progress cannot be there is that you gave someone a really interesting promise. And then you as a writer got really interested in something else, and you have a giant subplot going somewhere else that doesn't seem to advance the main story. The Last Jedi does this as a film. Last Jedi does this, and so what happens is Finn as a character has been introduced to us in the first movie and then reintroduced to us in the second movie as a guy who cares about his friend Rey and really wants to go find her and help her. And then the plot says, I did promise that, but what if you let some horses go free? What if you really needed to learn that horses should be free? And Finn's like, my friend Rey, the fate of the universe, Luke Skywalker, blah, blah, I want to go to my friend Rey. And the plot's like, but those horses. And not everyone had this experience, but it was a lot of people. And it was the experience I had. I'm like, why are we here? What are we doing? I am not feeling that this is progressing the promises made to me by this story. And so whatever is interesting happening there, we don't invest in.
All of Finn's wants and fears are chucked out the window, and he loses any attribute that humanizes him, and he becomes a mere leaf in the wind blowing in the direction of Rian Johnson's whims. Rian Johnson got so distracted by a random subplot that he forced Finn to halt the Galactic War just to learn a surface-level lesson about animal cruelty. In doing so, the script completely erases the intense, driving narrative gravity the audience should have been feeling. This total lack of structure exposes a deep rot. The signposts of progress that define George Lucas's original masterpieces were completely absent here. To understand why the sequels feel so hollow, we have to look back at the rigid structural laws that built the original trilogy. Let's take a look at the signposts which George Lucas artfully placed to craft a masterful work that captured the minds of millions.
One of the reasons Star Wars is so good is because I think it's doing the sort of thing that you do with a series in particular. Movie 1, which is actually movie 4, but whatever. Movie 1 is its own circle, but it is also the first act of a trilogy in which Luke has only just, if you kind of watch that movie at the end, he's accepted the calling to be a Jedi. In Star Wars, there's all these signposts of Luke needs to be a Jedi. That is the full arc. He needs to not only be a Jedi, he needs to redeem his father. Revenge is what you think the first movie is, and then later it becomes redemption. And that's signposted all the way through. Your capital P plot is destroy the Death Star. But your actual story is Luke needs to be a Jedi, and that's what his calling is, and that's what a lot of his progress is about. Face the father, become a Jedi, change the father to be you. This is how Dave Wolverton taught this kind of same idea in the class when I took it from him long ago, and it's always one of those points that he taught that stuck with me. He said, basically, if you don't know how to build the structure of your story, remember that before something can be accomplished, a character should generally fail at it at least once. In an ideal world, depending on how hard this thing is, they fail at it twice or 3 times, and they should try the most intelligent things you can think of and execute them cleverly, and either fail because of their personal flaws or lack of skill, or fail because they've been out thunk. With this one is the try-fail cycle would be Luke learning the Force.
Luke Skywalker's trench run is one of the most gripping scenes in cinema history, and it isn't just because of the special effects, but the meticulous buildup of tension and failure. Luke failed at almost everything he was supposed to accomplish up to this point. Even rescuing the princess, his biggest success, was a failure as her first instinct was to insult him upon his arrival. He also failed to deflect the blaster bolts, to babysit the 2 droids his uncle left under his stewardship, and to confront Vader, hence the reason Obi-Wan intervened. At the same time, Luke was humble and good-hearted. We wanted to believe in him, but he was the last person we should put our faith in based off of his track record. As much as we wanted him to succeed in blowing up the Death Star, It seemed almost impossible, and just a few seconds before the game ended, he scored the impossible shot, saving billions of lives and providing the Empire with their first loss. Another aspect that makes the trench run so amazing is that Luke's deepest calling isn't that of a warrior, but also that of a Jedi. And his greatest weapon wasn't a torpedo, but a mythical unseen force that binds the entire universe together. This is ultimately what caused the Empire to shake in fear. Luke's successes are only amazing because of all the failures along the way. Now with Rey, the writers attempted to take a different path. Even in the second film, Luke struggled to lift a lightsaber with the Force. And yet, without any training, Rey was able to rip a lightsaber out of the hands of a fully trained Force user, who spent his life under the tutelage of Luke Skywalker. Mark Hamill once pointed out these fatal incongruencies at a comic book convention, saying,
"I'll tell you where I thought I came in the forest, when the lightsaber goes like this and flies off. I said, oh, what a great entrance, ah! Rey caught it? She hasn't even been to Dagobah for training. What's the deal? I know, everyone said, you didn't finish your training either, so you have no room to talk. I was a Jedi school dropout, but I had to get back to my friends. That was my excuse. Look, what does Luke know? Can he feel that Han Solo's in danger? All those things. See, I said, even if you don't plan to tell the audience, I have to know for myself. I made up a whole backstory of what happened between getting my medal, and yes, I agree, the Wookiee should have gotten one too. But you're right. I said, because if you don't tell the audience, it's not about me anymore. It's really not my story. It's the story of Rey and Finn and Poe and all of them, which is the way it should be. But you'll find out more. I don't think anyone will ever say, that's exactly what I wanted.
On a micro level, we can see Luke make a tremendous amount of progress in A New Hope, but by the time we reach The Last Jedi, he's not even recognizable anymore. Since the Disney series was labeled a sequel, fans expected the films to not only fully incorporate Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, and Harrison Ford, but to further develop their characters. As previously noted, the foundation left in The Force Awakens forced Luke to become a washed-up failure. Not only would he not make progress with regards to restoring the Jedi Order, but he would actually take several steps back. The exact same structural regression demolished Han and Leia. A trilogy that originally concluded with their deep bond, love, and triumph ended up leaving them divorced, isolated, and watching the Republic they spent their entire lives bleeding to construct get shattered into a million pieces off screen. Disney didn't know how to progress the story past the victory line, so they simply smashed the board and hit reset. Brandon Sanderson didn't just critique this haphazard writing, he fixed it. He even explicitly stated that the legendary fight between Darth Maul, Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan was a key inspiration for his New York Times bestseller Mistborn. Mistborn, like Star Wars, captures many of the timeless beats in the hero's journey. Vin, like Luke, is an orphan who doesn't know who her father is. She is also endowed with a great magical power, and just as Luke was recruited by Obi-Wan on the impossible mission of saving Princess Leia, Vin was recruited for the impossible task of slaying the Lord Ruler. The Lord Ruler isn't just seen as a powerful emperor, but revered as a deity. Many have tried to kill him already. He has been dismembered, beheaded, and even burned to bone. Somehow each time the Lord Ruler survived, and so it was said that he couldn't be killed. Another striking resemblance comes from Kelsier, whose fate was very similar to Obi-Wan's. While on the Death Star, Obi-Wan allowed Vader to strike him down, saying that,
"If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine."
In a magnificent parallel, Kelsier forced the Lord Ruler to strike him down in public. But he calculates his death so meticulously that he became an instant folk hero, sparking a massive unstoppable uprising that ultimately allows Vin and her crew to slay the Lord Ruler and topple his empire. Interestingly, Vin, the protagonist in Mistborn, is very similar to Rey. Both girls grew up orphaned, discarded by their families. They both possess unparalleled raw talent. Rey is a descendant of Palpatine, and Vin a descendant of the Lord Ruler's right-hand man. Yet Disney uses Rey's lineage as a quick plot hole to explain her unprecedented power levels that somehow exceed both Luke and Anakin, whereas Brandon Sanderson used Vin's lineage to make a harrowing tragedy. Vin's backstory stings in an extremely palpable way. Her abandonment has left her emotionally scarred. She trusts no one and is constantly expecting betrayal. She is haunted by the PTSD of her brother's abuse, and constantly hears his voice echo in her mind like a schizophrenic. Furthermore, while both Vin and Rey are gifted with legendary talent, Sanderson still understood that Vin needed to have a try-fail cycle. Vin struggles immensely at her training, and she makes multiple reckless decisions, nearly exposing her crew and almost killing herself several times. Even in the end, when she kills the Lord Ruler, she almost fails, and only delivers a final blow after receiving immense help from the last clue given by Kelsier, and critical assistance provided by the rest of the crew. After Vin and the crew slay the Lord Ruler, they are ecstatic, much like the Rebellion and Ewoks in the Victory Celebration. But what makes Mistborn so genius is how Sanderson expanded the next books. The Well of Ascension and the Hero of Ages. He didn't just clone the Emperor or magically restore his military off-screen. Instead, he navigated the tumultuous uncertainty of a power vacuum, and explored how the citizens of a tyrannical empire who had been brutally enslaved for a millennium would actually react to the harsh realities of freedom. Sanderson proved that you can create immense staggering stakes in a sequel without torching the hard-won legacy the heroes had built in the world. The characters are still progressing. Disney conversely chose the path of structural laziness. They erased the resolution of the Return of the Jedi by not only shattering Luke's sacrifice and Han's and Leia's love, but also Vader's victory over Sidious. Resurrecting the Emperor wasn't creating a compelling narrative arc, but merely reheating the 3-day-old Big Mac which never should have been taken out of the garbage compactor. When we look back at the wreckage of the sequel trilogy through the engineering eyes of Brandon Sanderson, the lesson is clear. The story must move the character forward, promises to the reader must be fulfilled. The original trilogy was built on the unshakable foundation of the hero's journey, the essence of storytelling which has endured generations, and which will last till the end of time. Disney built their multi-billion-dollar house on a shifting foundation of sand, while Brandon Sanderson built his on solid rock. One is a crumbling corporate monument, the other a mythos which will endure for generations. What are their stories masterfully crafted, compelling narratives, which Disney executives should have looked at before writing the Disney sequels? Let me know in the comments section, and don't forget to like and subscribe.